Welcome to Easy Style with Sammy. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern. Each episode, I invite a friend, family member, colleague, or just someone I've met on this journey called life to come and share their personal style and approach to business, parenting, life, and everything in between. You'll hear motivational and inspirational stories that will help you refine and build your own personal style. Remember, style is easy when it comes from within. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Easy Style with Sammy, and I am here today with guest Marianna Kinee. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Sammy. I'm so excited to be here.
So I don't remember exactly who connected us. I feel like it was Steve Ramona. Is that correct?
Probably. Yes, probably.
There's like so many amazing people in my network that like connect me to all these other amazing people, and I don't always remember where they came from, but we met, had a great conversation, and I just love kind of the intro to your story that you shared with me. So I'm really excited to talk with you today and hear a little bit more about kind of your career path and some of the big changes that you've made. But before we kind of jump into that, why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about who you are and your story?
Well, thanks so much, first of all, for having me. My story is, I think, a little bit unique in that I used to call myself a corporate America junkie. I was in the corporate America space for about 25-ish years, maybe a little bit more, and with one company for 22 of those years. So that made me the unicorn / dinosaur. And but it was awesome to experience so much growth within one organization. I think it's kind of unique these days. My background has been always in supply chain, which includes everything from distribution to trucking to inventory planning. So a little bit of everything on the supply chain front. A few years ago, I decided that, you know what, I wanted to create my own stage and share information with more people than just the folks that I met every day in the office. Started my own podcast, and which has been really, really great. We're actually recording season 5 right now. Oh, no, 4 right now, which will launch in 2025. So very excited about that. And then a few months ago, I actually made the big jump from the big corporate ship to a tech startup. So going from a Fortune 50 company to a company of less than 50 over the past 4 months has been an interesting transition for me and been a lot of fun. And I can't wait to share more about that as well.
Yeah, I love that. And so I have so many questions because that is not the startup world takes a certain personality type. And so I'm really interested to hear kind of how you made that shift. But I want to start with, because you mentioned you do supply chain stuff. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you told me that a lot of what you did was in trucking logistics, correct?
Mm-hmm. That is correct.
Which is a very male-dominated field. So
yes.
what was that like? Was it helpful to be kind of, a female amongst all of these men, or was it, tricky? Like, how did you kind of work through that in order to be able to have that longevity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of women and females are sometimes just afraid to even think about supply chain as a career because they have this conception of maybe what a truck driver is or what it's like to work in a distribution center or, what it might be like to work with a lot of men from even a manufacturing perspective, which, is kind of where I started. So I had the privilege when I was in school and college where I actually worked in 2 very male-dominated, industries. One was at a paper mill, right, which is hugely male-dominated, right? With a bunch of engineers, and I learned a lot very early on how to maybe interact with people, but also like how to make sure I was protecting myself, if that makes sense. Yep. And then I had another job in college, which was one of my favorite phone calls to make to my dad, who is Italian. He's an immigrant, came over on a boat, got to call my dad and say, "Hey, Dad, I got this great summer job." He's like, "Great, you're making money, awesome. What are you going to do?" "I'm moving to Oklahoma for the summer, and I'm going to ride around with truck drivers." He was like, "You're going to do what?" He was not happy. But it was day freight drivers, not like I was spending the night in the cab. And it was my first real kind of eye-opening experience on multiple fronts. One, I had a different uniform that I had to wear than my male counterparts, right? So you think about Oklahoma, summer, hot. They got to wear shorts. I could not. right? And I
Oh, wow.
understood why, right? It was just one of those where it's like, all right, they wanted to make sure I was kind of maybe more modest and protected. But it also changed what I thought a truck driver was,
Mm.
right? Like I thought a truck driver was everything in the movies, uneducated, maybe
Mm-hmm.
a little redneck, roadhouse, they're always fighting, like whatever. And I get there and, some of these guys had their doctorates. Some of them had been driving their whole career and some maybe only for a few months. They came from all different backgrounds. I mean, when we talk about just a diversity of how they were raised, what parts of the country they came from, it was really cool to see this and have my mindset shattered at a young age of kind of who they are and what motivates and drives them, not to have the
Yeah.
pun there. So I think that's where as a female, go in with an open mind to supply
Yeah.
chain, because the conceptions you have and the thoughts you have, if you're open minded, they will be completely blown away. And
Mm.
now, fast forward, yes, I'm in the tech industry, but it's supply chain tech. So when
Mm-hmm.
I'm, out in the field, I'm on the road, most of my time is spent talking to truck drivers.
Mm.
And, to be able to say, excuse me, sir, ma'am, can I climb up on the side of your cab? Right. Like that's their
Yeah.
their office, right? You can't, you
It's
want
like
to be.
asking permission to come aboard a boat, right? Like
That's right.
captain.
That's right. And,
Yeah.
to hear their stories and get their
Mm.
feedback is absolutely amazing. And it gives you an appreciation of how much, the United States, if you think about how much is actually moved via truck, they are the backbone of
Yeah.
this country. And, you go in with that kind of respect and that willingness to learn from their experience. It's amazing. I highly recommend supply chain as a career.
I
It's
love that.
fun. It changes every day. It's a people business.
Yeah.
And it's a business where you get to be creative. Women, I think, have this innate skill of seeing patterns and how things connect
Mm.
differently than men do, right? And so when you apply that to us from a supply chain spin, it's really cool to be able to come up with creative solutions because you're asking why in a different way.
I love that. I want to back up because you said, when you approach the conversation from a respect, like this is your space, I'm here to learn from you. Because I worked in the music industry for a hot minute, also very male dominated.
Yep.
And what I found was the communication and the respect was very different. For example, like I would get phone calls from management teams and, people at labels and whatnot. And they would be, well, can I talk to your supervisor? I'm like, no, I am the person making this decision. Like this,
Yeah.
but no, who else can I talk? Like, so there was a lot of things like that, or they would assume that I was a runner or that I was, the assistant. And so, it's really interesting in that world. So I love your approach, but I'm just curious, what was that like, even not talking to the truck drivers, but once you were really at corporate for a long time and you had a team around you, like how was that communication style? How did you work through that and kind of continue to build the respect amongst your team as you kind of grew in your career?
Yeah, it's a lot of it is about listening first, right? And when you do that, you can start to better understand how different people like to be communicated with, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're in the corporate space, that could mean, I had one boss wanted everything in email, and they wanted a dissertation, right? Which today sounds crazy, right? But 20 years ago made a lot of sense. Now, fast forward, I actually can read people's emails and I'll make edits. So sometimes it's hey, no, don't send that to this person this way, because they're only going to look on it on their phone, right?
Yep.
It's got to have a certain amount of bullets, and they won't read beyond that. And so being able to understand that communication style that person wants to receive, not how I like to do it, how do they like to receive it? And that I think really helps you navigate either, laterally and up and down.
Yep.
Right. When you talk about how do you get respect from your team, there have been many instances where I was the new kid on the block. That's kind of where I am now, right? You get put in a position, the people that are on your team didn't choose to work for you, right? All of a sudden now they got a new boss, and there's chaos that comes along with that.
Yeah.
So I like to think about, how do I take my team from chaos to community and move that cycle as quickly as possible, right? Because chaos doesn't just happen and then go away and it never comes back. You add a new person to a team. Somebody gets promoted and leaves. Somebody might have an illness. Somebody might have a baby and they go away for a few months and then they come back, right? There is always some level of chaos. It does not necessarily mean a huge reorg. It doesn't mean all of a sudden you have new projects or a change in direction. But you as a leader have an opportunity to create an environment where the whole team feels like they're part of a community. Yeah. Right? Community is the neighbor that's willing to pick up your mail when you're out of town. They're the ones that that you'll go move their trash up their driveway, right? Community is a very different experience than family. Family can be dysfunctional, right? Yep. So when people say, "Oh, I got my work family," I don't really want a work family. I want to work community, right? And so being able to create an environment where you have that type of mutual respect. If I'm new, I don't necessarily know all the systems and processes. Cool. I want to sit down and learn, or I'm going to have a level of trust with the people on my team that know how to do it. And when they know that, oh, she trusts me, she's actually executes on that trust, there's respect, maybe she'll go to bat for me. Like that's huge. Or if there's consistency, right? Like I have 2 kids. Kids thrive on consistency.
Yes.
It's the same thing when it's a 25, 35, 45, 65-year-old person working for you. They thrive on consistency too. Yeah. It was entertaining this week. I was traveling this week with some parts of my team. And, one young lady was like, "Man, we've had this system. We've never consistently used it. And you come in and you religiously use it every single week for our one-on-ones." And she's like, "That's been really kind of cool, because now I have a record of my conversations. Yep. There's a structure. I feel like I know what's going to happen in the conversation." And I think that when you can create that, magic starts to happen.
I love that. Well, and we could talk about this, I feel like, this topic all day long, because it's so good. And I love that community, I think, is a great way to frame that, because it just implies so much about how we treat each other and how we kind of show up. But I really am excited to hear like your mindset around, okay, I've got this great sort of, I say stable in air quotes, because who knows with corporate America these days.
That's right.
But you had longevity at this career. You have full benefits. You have, all of these perks that come with corporate America. You have some stability. Your paycheck is going to be coming on a regular basis. So kind of walk me through where you were at and how this startup opportunity came to you, and kind of your process for making that leap, because that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anybody can go look at my LinkedIn and figure out my work history. So that's pretty easy to do. Mm-hmm. But, if earlier of 2024, I started having these thoughts of, okay, I have moved around a lot. Like, that's the one great thing about being with a large organization. You can recreate your career over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I did just that. Everything from store operations, inventory, merchandising, domestic transportation, international transportation, distribution, like literally the gamut. So I was at this point where I'm like, all right, I'm kind of bored. Boredom for me is dangerous.
Yeah.
And I loved my team. I loved what I was doing, but I'd already been doing this particular role for about 5 years. So it was just one of those where I'm like, and I just felt like I need to try something different. And this is the time, right? Like, I'm 47. This is the time to go recreate myself. And this opportunity came about to go to a tech startup. And I say startup, but it's been around for 10 years. So that's a pretty
so it had some stability. Yeah.
Yep. And I had actually worked with them implementing their software the 3 years prior. So I already had exposure to the company, knew their culture, knew how their team dynamics were. And I fell in love with what they're doing. And so the company's called Vector, and we are reimagining how supply chain EBOL works,
Mhm.
which is allowing us to digitize the whole process from a pickup at a shipper all the way to the dock door at a receiver. And so when you think of shipping, ever since the beginning of time, people have written down on a bill of lading what's on that shipment. Like you can go and find a bill of ladings from hundreds of years ago because we're shipping spices or we're shipping whatever.
Mhm.
We want to know what's on that ship. It's the same thing today. But now if you want to have an Uber, you can see where that Uber is coming to pick you up,
Mm.
right? You can see it move all the way until your doorstep of now it's here, or your pizza tracker of I've ordered
Yep.
my pizza and I can see they put the pepperoni on it, right? It's now in the oven. Well, that's not something that is typical in transportation yet. So we're on the forefront of that, meaning we can digitize from the beginning, just from a photograph of that bill of lading to a full digital, taking in the metadata, all the things, allowing a driver to get into a yard without a person if need be, like scanning a QR code or
Mhm.
putting in a special pin and giving them direction all the way to a dock door. That's huge, especially as you start thinking about security of freight, right? If
Mhm.
people there's different parts of the country with high rates of theft, and so people literally will steal an entire truck. And you and I may be like, that's crazy. Well, guess what? It happens.
Yeah.
And so it's really exciting to be on the forefront. I'd fallen in love with the concept. I know it's going to change the industry and I wanted to be part of it.
That's
So it was
amazing.
time to move. Yeah.
Was there any hesitation? Because I feel like, when I started my
Mm.
business and left my job, I couldn't have done it without the support of my family. So was your family on board, or were they holy cow? Because also with the startup, the schedule is different. It's not
Yeah.
as regular or consistent. That's just not the nature of that space. And so how was that for your family to transition?
Yeah. Thankfully my husband was very supportive, but we spent probably 2 months debating it, praying
Yeah.
about it, thinking over it, all the things until we knew we were both aligned
Yeah.
because it was going to be a shift, right, for our family. And, it has been interesting. I think the biggest change is the time zone shift
Yeah.
because it's tech. Most people in tech are on the West Coast.
West
I am
Coast.
on the East Coast. So it's been a very different, oh, my meetings may not start until 9 a.m., whereas before it was 8 or 7:30.
Yeah.
And then they could, in theory, go very late at night,
Mhm.
which then goes to boundaries, right? So we should
Right.
have boundaries in our relationships. That includes work.
Yep.
And so, as an example, last night people were like, "Hey, we can meet. We'll meet at 6:30, and we'll have this conversation." And I said, "Well, my kids have a piano recital,
Yep.
so if that's the time you want to do it, I won't be on it. I'm happy to go listen to the replay. I can give you my feedback in advance, but I'm not going to be on the call." And to be part of a team where they're like, "Oh yeah, totally, go do what you need to do. Family first." Family first is not common in tech startups, right?
No. Well, it's a hustle. It's a hustle and a grind, right? Because if you're not moving faster, then somebody else might catch up to you and,
Right,
you
right.
lose
And
your
so I think that's
edge.
been, really, really cool to see that there is still that once again, I knew the culture coming in,
Yeah.
and it was one that I could say, okay, that aligns with my culture because I want to be able to
Yeah.
tell my team, hey, if you have a family emergency,
Yeah.
we'll take care of it.
Yep.
Family first.
I love that. Well, and I wanted to touch on too, kind of for you personally, the corporate structure is very different. I mean, if you're at a large corporate company, in theory, there are a lot of systems in place. There's a lot of processes, some that are efficient, some that aren't, some that are great, some that are frustrating, but they exist. And you kind
Yes.
of work in that structure. And now in your new role, you're kind of building some of those for yourself
Yeah.
and your team. And kind of just like you said earlier, maybe it's just being consistent with the systems that exist because you've got people coming and going. How
Mhm.
has that been for you from a work standpoint of okay, you said chaos happens all the time, but now it's a different kind of chaos. So how do
Yes.
you
Yeah.
kind of transition? And also, being later in your career, sometimes it is harder to kind of change your ways, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great, great question, because there are times when people say, "Oh, well, if you've been in a company over 20 years," which I was in that bucket, other companies will look at you and say, "Maybe I shouldn't
Right.
hire her because she obviously can't change," which I think is a crock, because, like I said, I
Right.
had probably 5 to 7 different careers within the 20 years, right?
Right.
But coming over to your question, it was interesting because I was used to, here's how you do things. Here's how
Yep.
you request time off, or whatever. And for the first time in the company's history, they were getting ready to do annual reviews,
In 10
right?
years.
And I come in, I'm like, that sounds great. I know totally how to do it, right? Like, okay, I can add value right away. I can't code because I'm not a coder. That's not why I was brought in, right? I'm an operator. I was brought in to have that perspective and to lead a team. And I was like, I know how to do reviews. And so it was really interesting to come to the table and say, well, hey, some parts of the organization, it's not somebody who has 10 people or 20 people to report to them. They may have none, right? It's very flat, right? And so I have a team, so my area is not flat. So I said, okay, I want to do a 9 block. What's a 9 block? Okay, well, this is how you map people out. Are they your high potential, meaning they're promotable within a certain period of time? Their runway is really long. We can see them, in the company very long. Then you've got your stable, right? Like, everybody needs a good fry cook. Like,
Yeah.
you go to a
Yeah.
restaurant, if you want to get the really good fries, you gotta have the guy or the gal they are consistent.
Yep.
They may not be the CEO in 3 years or 5 years, but they are just like, you need that. You need those people. And so being able to go in and say, okay, I don't know any of these people. So let's talk collectively. Where do you think
Yeah.
they are? Right? Like, let's have this conversation. Let's build a game plan. Let's have a review where it's almost 360. Right? We interviewed their customers. We interviewed their peers. We interviewed other leaders, combined all that together and said, okay, here's feedback. We created, we created quarterly metrics. And some of those were things that were based off what the customers needed. So my team supports directly facility customers. So you think of, companies like the Home Depot or Conagra or Sprouts and things like that, right? Where we have to provide value to them. Well, what's value to them?
Yeah.
So understanding their metrics and then holding the team accountable to help them get to those metrics, along with things that they can just do on their own.
Yep.
Right? Hey, you have a process improvement project. You get to present, you get all these things. And so really in the first few months, being able to put structure around from a leadership and development standpoint was really cool to be able to bring to the table. On the
Yeah.
flip side, it's hey, I don't know, like, I don't know the answer. So you have to be able to say, I don't know the answer.
Hmm.
And maybe put that out publicly in a Slack channel of, hey, how do I do XYZ? Or does the system do this? It has been it's really important, because for me, like I mentioned earlier, I was getting bored. Boredom
Yeah.
is too much comfort. I love every so often being thrown into something that's completely uncomfortable. So that's something that I know that I thrive in. That doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily translate to everybody, but it's worked out really well, for me in my career.
I love that. Well, and I think the hardest part about being in a smaller organization, because most of my career has been working for smaller
Yeah.
businesses, is the not and you'll love this as a supply chain person, but the not thinking about, when I make this decision, who else does it affect down the line, and how am
Yeah.
I, like, oh, I think I'm in the silo, and if I implement this new process, it's not going to do anything, and then like 3 weeks later, Susie down the road is like, all of my data screwed up, everything's messed up,
Mm.
what's going, so I think,
Yeah.
like, that's really cool that you can take all of that experience, and like you said earlier, kind of that puzzle mapping that's unique to you and your skill set, and kind of bring that in, because you're right, not a lot of people can transition into a startup, because it's just it's a different kind of breed. But
Yeah.
what I really want to kind of maybe leave everyone with, I would love for you to share, because you mentioned you were 47 when you made this leap.
Mhm.
For people that say, well, I'm too old, or like, I'm not 20 anymore, I can't make a career change or a shift. And it wasn't really a career change. You're still doing a lot of similar work, but I can't do this. I'm too old. Nobody's, whatever. What would you say to people that are not taking that risk or chance or shift into something that they would love because they think that and 47 is not old, but
No, I'm halfway through life.
yeah.
Hopefully less than halfway through life.
Yeah,
We'll see. Right. I would say, you've got to ask yourself, why are you telling yourself that story?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's the same thing I tell my kids, oh, I can't do that, Mom. I don't want to hear I can't.
Right.
Right. If you aren't talking to yourself in a positive manner, not positive things will happen. Right. So it's, oh, I'm not going to do well at this test, or I can't make that leap because it's too big of a change. You just talked yourself into that reality. Right. And it's not, some people, oh, that's woo woo mumbo jumbo. It's actually not. You just try it. I do it sometimes when I know I'm going into a situation or a meeting that might be challenging. Mm-hmm. And I would, times find myself going, oh, I don't want to have that meeting. It's going to be so hard. It's going to be so difficult. It's going to be a fight. Blah, blah. And I've started saying, no, it's going to be an interesting conversation. It's going to be a conversation full of curiosity. It's going to end up being a positive experience. We will come to some sort of alignment. And I would have these conversations with myself the night before or the morning of or whatever. And what I found was that the experience ended up being better.
Yeah.
It's that self-fulfilling prophecy. Does it mean that I always get my way? No. Does it mean it was always a great meeting or whatever? Maybe not. But it was better than what it would have been if I went in with that negative mindset. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is something that everybody can do, regardless if it's a career decision. It's I will never be able to run a marathon. Well, if you don't run a 1K, you're right. You're never going to get to a marathon. You got to start somewhere. And so starting with those baby steps and starting with some of that positive conversations in your head is going to allow you to I think, achieve more than what you think you can achieve. Right? It's just like me starting the podcast, right? Why? Or maybe even you starting your podcast. People are probably like, why are you doing it? How do you find the time? You've got all this other stuff. Well, it's just something that I wanted to see if I can do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I'm never going to do it if I don't do it.
Yeah. I love that. And I feel like for you also, maybe it's because this has been the case for me, a journey that I've learned as I've had my own business is finding the success factors that you actually care about and not the success factors that other people might think are success, Yes. So it's like, then when you go into those tougher things, it's like, well, that's great. I feel like I did great, even though other people might be like, that was terrible. Or, okay. So for example, I was on a call the other day and they were talking, it was with some authors, and they were talking about how their goal is not when they release their book to be a New York Times bestseller, because you can't control the other factors of who else is releasing a book when you are, or what is the landscape, right? Instead, it's, I want to sell X amount of books in the first 6 weeks, because that's what I think is going to help me be most successful. And so I think for you, that sounds similar in that you have set your own goals for what success looks for you and maneuvered through it so that you can feel comfortable with the choices you're making.
Yeah. I mean, you speak about an author, but being, speaking with authors, one of the things I wanted to do too was I wanted to write a book. Mm-hmm. And so I started asking people who I knew had written books, what was the process? How long did it take you? Yeah. And, it's going to cost you 20 grand and it's going to take you a year and a half. And I was like, well, no, I don't want to spend that. I don't want to spend that much time. I want to do it now. It's like my goal for this year is to do this. So I set audacious goals, right? I'm going to do it in 6 months. I'm going to do it in 6 months and I'm only going to spend, $1,000. And that was my, whatever. And so I had to figure out, how do I do that? Oh, okay. Well, I have to self-publish. Okay. I'm willing to do that. I don't want to be a bestseller. I mean, if I got a bestseller list, great. But to your point, can't control all those factors. I wanted to be one of the 1% that have actually said they wrote a book.
Yeah.
And so went through that whole process and just did it. Yep. Right. And so people are like, well, what do you mean? I just did it. I wrote it. I had, I had friends who were willing to do kind of revisions and edits. They were willing to donate their time, all the things. And then now I look and I see my 2 girls and they are going, oh, we want to write a book.
That's amazing.
We want, I'm like, at 7 at the time, 7 and 10 at the time, like I never had that thought, but now they do.
Because you modeled that for them.
Because I modeled it, right? You just
Mhm.
went ahead and did it. And now I see what they're creating with, I unfortunately introduced them to the crazy, wacky world of Chat GPT because I wanted to create an image of Van Gogh with a pizza on his head. And they're like, how did you do this? I was like, I did it with Chat GPT. But now they're becoming like these master Chat GPT prompt writers, which I'm like, well, that could be a big win for them in their future. You never know, right? Like, and it's been really fun to see what they are doing just in their own, hey, how can I be creative in how I ask this? How can I be creative in how I rewrite this? If I put what I wrote in, what does it do if I say this? That's really interesting, I think, to see what they're doing creatively with technology. Once again, I would never even have thought of at their age.
Yeah.
So
I love
it's
that.
really fun.
I love that. Well, Marianna, I think your story is so inspiring, and I know that, you have so much that you're going to accomplish. I'm excited to hear and learn more about how the company continues to grow and evolve and how you continue to grow and evolve with it. But if people want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so the easiest way, if you just go to mightinmotion.com, that's got all my connection points, different podcasts I've been on, links to my podcast, all the fun things. I'm very much involved on LinkedIn. So, DMing me on LinkedIn, you get me, you don't get somebody else, it's me. And I love connecting with people that way. Happy to answer questions about what Vector does as well, plus my book, my podcast, that sort of thing. So would love to connect with people about leadership, supply chain, innovation, and all the things.
Yeah, if you have any interest in supply chain, or if you've thought about that as a career, definitely check out the podcast. What's the name?
Might in Motion.
Might in Motion. Well, Marianna, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to say a big thank you to Marianna again for joining me today. There's so many things that I love about her story, but one of the things that I think is super relatable is in the switching careers, even with your own business or within your own company. It doesn't have to be like a huge shift, but something as simple as saying to your supervisor or to your executive director or whomever, like, I'm really interested in learning about this, or I'd really like to grow my skills here. Really advocating for yourself in that way, because a lot of times we don't think about doing that. We don't think about putting ourselves out there, or we assume that people know kind of what our goals are and what we want to do. And you might be surprised by what comes out and what they share with you. Oh yeah, we have this opportunity, or we're thinking about doing this. You never know. But if you don't communicate that or go for it, then you're not going to be able to make anything happen there. So I just wanted to share that because I think, yes, she worked for a large corporate job company where there's probably job postings all the time that she could maneuver through. But even if you're with a smaller company, sharing kind of some of the things you're interested in and some ideas you have can really go a long way. So I hope that you'll do that if that's something you've been thinking about. Otherwise, if you want to grab the show notes, watch the video version of this episode, or just get some additional resources, you can do that at easystylewithsammy.com/33. I really hope that you'll hit subscribe wherever you listen, or if you watch them on YouTube. We are wherever you stream your podcasts, and again on YouTube at Easy Style with Sammy. Thank you so much for listening and taking time out of your day. I'm always looking for more guests, so if you have the perfect person, or if you're that person and want to be interviewed on Easy Style with Sammy, shoot me a message. hello@easystylewithsammy.com. That's SAMI. Anyway, thank you so much for listening and taking the time to be here. I hope you were inspired as much as I was, and I will see you in the next one.